I sat at the far end of the table watching her slice the cake with pride. Her daughter got the biggest piece. Me? She scraped the dried rice from the bottom of the pot and called it enough. I stayed silent as always. But that night, when the doctor walked in after dinner, even she, my stepmother, dropped her plate. Efua was just 6 years old when her world changed forever. Her mother died suddenly, and everything around her felt cold and empty. She used to be her father's little princess, the one he carried on his shoulders, the one he always smiled at. But that love didn't last. Just 1 year later, her father married a new woman named Ababa. She was loud, always dressed in bright clothes, and came with a daughter of her own, Naria. At first, Efua thought maybe this could be a new beginning, but it was the start of a sad chapter. Ababa treated her daughter like gold, while Efua was treated like she didn't even exist. Naria got hugs, new clothes, and her favorite food. Efua, she got nothing but cold stares and harsh words. Every morning, Efua woke up before everyone to clean the house. She cooked meals she was never allowed to enjoy, and washed dishes she didn't eat from. If she was lucky, she would get the scraps left in the pot. Sometimes, just a piece of bread and water. Her father no longer looked at her the same. It was like he forgot she was his child too. At the dinner table, she sat at the far end, barely spoken to. If she asked for something, Ababa would snap, "Be grateful you're even here." Efua's smile slowly disappeared. Her voice got softer. She became a shadow in her own home, always there, always working, but never seen. Deep down, she missed her mother more every day, because with her gone, there was no one left to protect her. And the worst part, no one noticed how sad she really was. At school, Efua was just as quiet and alone as she was at home. She walked with her head down, sat at the back of the class, and barely spoke unless she had to. Other kids played, laughed, and shared jokes, but Efua always sat alone, pretending not to care. Inside, she felt empty. She carried the sadness from home with her every day, like a heavy bag no one could see. But there was one person who noticed her, Femi. He was a cheerful boy, with bright eyes and a big heart. Everyone knew Femi wanted to be a doctor when he grew up. He was always reading science books and asking questions about how the human body worked. But more than that, Femi was kind, and kind people always see what others ignore. Femi noticed that Efua never brought lunch. He saw how she kept to herself and how her uniform was always a little worn out. So one day, he walked up to her with a smile and asked, "Want to share?" From that moment, something changed. Efua was still shy, but around Femi, she smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't felt in years. Every day, Femi brought extra food and made sure Efua ate with him. He shared not just his lunch, but also his jokes, his stories, and his time. He never made her feel like she was a burden. When she was too sad to talk, he just sat beside her. When she laughed, he laughed louder, like he had been waiting to hear that sound. Femi became her only friend. He made school feel a little less lonely. But even Femi didn't know the full story. He didn't know about the cold meals at night, the heavy chores, or the way Ababa treated her like she didn't belong. Efua never told him. She was too ashamed, or maybe too scared. She thought if she said it out loud, it would hurt even more. So she smiled through the pain. And Femi, thinking he had made her world a little brighter, never pushed too hard. He didn't know that his simple kindness was the only light in Efua's dark world. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the house was louder than usual. Bright balloons hung from the ceiling, colourful lights blinked on the walls, and music played from the big speaker in the living room. The smell of fried chicken, jollof rice, meat pies, and sweet vanilla cake filled the air. Guests dressed in fine clothes laughed and danced. The house looked beautiful, like something out of a party magazine. But this celebration wasn't for Efua. It was Naria's birthday, Ababa's daughter, the girl who always got the best of everything. Efua had helped clean the entire house that morning. She had scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, arranged the chairs, and even helped Ababa decorate the cake. But now that the party had started, she wasn't allowed to sit with the guests. Instead, Ababa told her to stay in the kitchen and carry food to everyone like a servant. Efua wore her old, faded dress, while Naria danced in a brand new shiny gown. People kept giving Naria gifts, hugs, and compliments. No one looked at Efua, not even her father. He was busy chatting and laughing with the guests. acting like he didn't see the way his own daughter was being treated. Efua tried to hide her sadness, but it was hard. She kept going back and forth, carrying food trays, cleaning spilled drinks, and collecting dirty plates. When it was time to cut the cake, everyone gathered around the table, cheering loudly. Efua stood at a corner, far from the happy crowd, watching the big, creamy cake being sliced. After all her hard work, she slowly walked up to Abeba and softly said, "Please, can I have a small slice?" Abeba turned and looked at her like she was dirt. Then she smirked and said loudly, You don't get cake. Leftovers are more your size." People laughed. Efua's cheeks burned. She looked down, wishing the ground would swallow her. She didn't ask again. She just walked away quietly, holding back tears. She went to the back of the house, sat on a small wooden stool, and waited until the party was over. As she sat there alone, her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten all day. All the food she had helped prepare, none of it was meant for her. Her only reward was a plate of cold rice that was scraped from the bottom of the pot, and even that came with a warning to be quick and wash the dishes after. Efua didn't cry. She had cried too many times before. Now, she just sat in silence, hugging herself tightly, wondering why nobody cared. It was Naria's birthday, but Efua felt like she was the one being punished. The party was almost over. People had eaten, danced, and laughed for hours. Plates were piled high with leftover food, drinks were half finished on the tables, and the big birthday cake was nearly gone. Everyone was full and smiling, talking about how perfect the night had been. Naria, the birthday girl, was walking around proudly, showing off her new clothes and gifts. Ababa stood beside her, smiling proudly, as if the world belonged to just the two of them. Efua was in the kitchen, washing dishes with tired hands. Her feet ached from standing all day, her stomach still empty, but she stayed quiet. She always stayed quiet. She listened to the voices from the living room, pretending not to care. Suddenly, a loud scream cut through the music. "Help! Naria!" People turned and saw Naria on the floor, shaking badly. Her eyes rolled back and her body trembled. One of the guests dropped their drink. Another gasped and covered their mouth. Panic filled the room. Chairs moved, people shouted, and someone yelled, "Call a doctor!" Abeba ran to her daughter and screamed her name. "Naria! Naria! Wake up!" She was shaking her, crying, her hands not knowing what to do. All the pride on her face vanished in seconds. Her perfect party had turned into a nightmare. Efua heard the chaos and rushed out. Her heart was beating fast. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she had to do something. While everyone stood around frozen, she ran out the gate and shouted for help from neighbors. One of them quickly called for emergency help. As they waited, Naria's breathing became weaker. The happy house turned into a house full of fear. Some guests started whispering. Others watched Abeba, who now looked pale and confused. No one noticed Efua, the girl who was always in the background. But in that moment, she was the only one thinking clearly. Even though she had been treated badly all day, she didn't stand still. She didn't walk away. She helped. And that moment changed everything. Because after that fall, nothing would be the same again. The smiling guests would soon frown. The proud mother would soon be questioned. And the quiet girl, the one who was always ignored, she was about to become the center of everything. No one knew it yet, but the truth was about to come out. And it all started with that unexpected fall. When the ambulance arrived with the emergency team, Femi was with them. He was now a medical intern, learning how to help in real-life emergencies. But he never expected that the house they rushed to would be Efua's. His heart dropped the moment he saw her standing at the gate, looking worried and scared. She hadn't changed much, just thinner, quieter, but still that same girl who once smiled at his jokes in school. Femi and the medics ran inside. Naria was lying on the floor, barely conscious. Her lips were slightly swollen, her breathing weak and fast. Abeba was crying beside her, shouting Naria's name and blaming everyone around her. The guests had moved aside, staring in shock. Femi took a deep breath and stepped forward to help. He asked the most important question. What did she eat before this happened? Everyone looked confused. Abeba stammered, "Just food, rice, stew, and some cake." Femi paused. He looked around. Plates were still on the table. He asked to see what was left. A guest handed him a plate with a bit of rice and some leftover icing from the birthday cake. Femi looked closely, then sniffed the icing. His eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. He asked Abeba again, "Did the cake have nuts in it, or anything made with nut oil?" Abeba waved her hand. "No, no, just regular icing. It was a special order. I told the bakery no nuts." But Femi wasn't sure. He checked the cake box and ingredients list that had been thrown in the bin, and there it was, clearly written in small print, "May contain traces of ground nut oil." That moment froze everything in Femi's mind. He remembered Naria had a nut allergy. He remembered a time in school when she almost got sick from just touching a peanut candy wrapper. How could Abeba not remember? Or worse, did she ignore it? He looked at Efua, who stood quietly at the door, holding her hands together tightly. She hadn't eaten the cake. She hadn't even touched it. And now, strangely, that had protected her. Femi stood up slowly. Something felt wrong, not just with the cake, but with the way the house felt. The way Efua stood like a visitor in her own home. He could feel it in his bones. There was more to this story, and this wasn't just an accident. That day, Femi wasn't just a medical intern. He was about to uncover something much deeper, something that had been hidden for too long. Femi stood still, holding the empty plate in one hand and staring at the cake that was half eaten on the table. The air felt heavy. He turned to Abeba and asked, very calmly, "Can I see the cake?" Everyone looked at him, confused. Abeba blinked and said, "It's just cake. What do you want with it?" But she moved aside and pointed to the box on the counter. Femi walked over, picked up the box, and began reading the small text on the label. His eyes caught something important. "May contain traces of nut oil," it said. That was all he needed to see. He looked up sharply. "Naria is allergic to nuts, right?" he asked. The room went quiet. Abeba's eyes widened for a second, then she quickly looked away. "Yes, but I didn't think... I told the bakery no nuts." Femi didn't say anything at first. He checked the leftover icing on one of the plates. The smell, the texture, it wasn't just a trace. There were real signs of nut-based oil in the frosting. It wasn't safe. "She shouldn't have eaten this," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Then something hit him even harder. He turned to Efua, who was standing quietly in the corner. "Did you eat any of the cake?" he asked her gently. She shook her head slowly. "Number, she didn't let me," Efua said in a small voice. Femi's chest tightened. Efua hadn't been given any cake. She had asked, and Abeba had refused. At first that felt cruel, unfair, but now, it looked like that small act of cruelty might have saved her life. He looked at Abeba again, and for the first time he saw it. Guilt, not shock, not confusion. Guilt. It was there in her eyes, even though she tried to hide it. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt Naria. Maybe she just thought the nut oil wouldn't be a problem. Or maybe she'd been more careless than she wanted to admit. But the truth was clear now. Efua was treated like nothing, like someone who didn't deserve a simple piece of cake. Yet, that same neglect had protected her. It was twisted. It was painful. But it was also a turning point. Femi knew something had to be done. This wasn't just about food. It was about the way Efua had been treated for years. And this cake, this one small cake, was only the beginning of the truth that was about to come out. Efua stood by the wall, her hands shaking, her eyes full of tears. Everything around her felt loud. The voices, the confusion, the beeping from the ambulance outside. But inside her, it was silent, except for one memory she could no longer keep inside. Femi noticed her standing alone and gently walked up to her. "Efua," he said softly, "is there something you're not telling us?" She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to say it before. I thought no one would believe me." Femi encouraged her. "You can tell me anything." Taking a deep breath, Efua wiped her tears and finally said the words that had been burning in her heart for a long time. "One night, I was walking to the kitchen and I heard Abeba talking on the phone. She didn't know I was listening. She said, 'Efua eats too much. If only I could feed just one.'" Her voice cracked as she repeated it. She said it like I was the extra one, like I was too much. At first, Efua had thought maybe Abeba was just angry that day, maybe tired. But now, hearing what happened to Naria and how the cake had something she was allergic to, Efua started to wonder if it had all been more than just words. Femi didn't brush it off. He didn't say, "Oh, she didn't mean it, number." He looked serious. He gently squeezed Efua's shoulder, then turned to speak with the older doctor who had come with the emergency team. When the doctor heard Efua's words, his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked over at Abeba, then at the cake box. "That's not something we ignore," he said firmly. Even careless words can hide dangerous thoughts. Femi agreed. If she knew Naria had allergies, why take the risk? Why use a frosting with nut oil when she could have picked something safe? Everything started to look different now. Maybe it wasn't just a mistake. Maybe Abeba had taken a chance, hoping one child would eat and one wouldn't. Maybe her cruel words that night weren't just talk. And the saddest part? Efua had carried this secret for so long, thinking she was just unwanted, never realizing how close she came to real danger. But now the truth was coming out, and with Femi by her side, someone was finally listening. Someone was finally taking her seriously. The sound of sirens filled the street as the authorities arrived. Neighbors peeped through their windows, whispering to one another. Inside the house, things were no longer the same. The joyful party had turned into a scene of questions, shock, and silence. Police officers stepped into the living room, asking to speak with everyone who had been at the party. Efua stood quietly in a corner, Femi by her side, as people started talking, not just about what happened to Naria, but about what had been happening to Efua for years. One by one, guests who had known the family began to open up. An aunt said, "I always wondered why Efua never got birthday gifts, even when Naria did." A neighbor added, "I've seen her outside washing clothes alone while the others ate inside." Someone else whispered, "She was always so thin, always so quiet, like she was scared to breathe too loud." Everything came pouring out. The way Efua was treated wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. People now saw the signs they had ignored. They remembered the bruises, the tired eyes, the way she flinched when someone raised their voice. It wasn't just emotional pain, it was clear neglect. It was almost harm that could have taken her life. The police listened closely. They took pictures of the cake, the food, the kitchen. The doctor explained about the nut-based oil and how dangerous it was for someone like Naria. They took notes as Efua shared what she heard that night. Abeba made that cruel phone call. In the middle of all this, Efua's father sat quietly on the sofa. His face looked pale and full of shame. For years, he had believed Abeba's sweet words and ignored his own daughter's suffering. Now, with the truth in front of him, he couldn't say anything. His silence was louder than any shout. He looked at Efua with tears in his eyes, but it was too late. People who once smiled at Abeba now looked at her with disgust. She had tried to cover her actions with smiles and parties, but everything was now in the open. The truth had come out in front of everyone, and for the first time, Efua wasn't just a shadow in the corner. She was the one everyone saw, and they finally saw what she had been through, what she had survived. Efua stood in the middle of the room, her hands slightly shaking, but her voice firm for the first time. The girl who had always stayed quiet, who had always taken the blame, who had always been pushed aside, finally spoke. Her eyes were full of pain, but also of courage. Everyone was watching. Some people gasped, some cried, but Efua kept going. She spoke about the nights she went to bed hungry, while the others in the house laughed over full plates. She talked about being locked outside in the cold, told to finish chores long after the lights went out. She remembered crying silently so no one would hear, hugging herself in the dark, wishing her mother was still alive. She shared how Abeba would mock her, saying she wasn't good enough, that she was just a leftover. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she described her last birthday, or rather, the one she never had. She said how she sat alone in her tiny room while Naria got presents and cake. She didn't even get to make a wish. "That day," she whispered, "I told myself I didn't matter." But now, something had changed. She looked around and saw that people were finally listening, not brushing her aside, not calling her dramatic. They were hearing her and believing her. Femi stood beside her, holding her hand. His presence reminded her she wasn't alone anymore. The authorities nodded, writing down every word. The truth was powerful, and now it couldn't be ignored. Efua's father couldn't look at her. His head was bowed. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was just realizing what he had allowed under his roof. But Efua didn't speak to blame. She spoke to heal. The officers promised action. The law would now do what her family never did, protect her. And in that moment, Efua changed. She was no longer the girl hiding in corners, eating leftovers, pretending not to feel. She had found her voice. She had found her truth. And most importantly, she had found her strength. From the ashes of pain, Efua was rising, not just as a survivor, but as someone who now believed in her own worth. Her story was no longer hidden. It was out, loud, and powerful. Justice had started, and for the first time ever, Efua was finally free. After everything that happened, Abeba was taken away by the police. She was charged with endangerment because what she did wasn't just cruel, it was dangerous. The house that used to feel like a prison for Efua was finally free of her stepmother's harsh control. Naria, Abeba's daughter, stayed in the hospital for a while, slowly getting better. When she was strong enough, she quietly admitted something that shocked everyone. She had always known about how Abeba treated Efua badly, but she was too scared to say anything. Fear had kept her silent, but now the truth was out. Efua's father, overwhelmed by guilt and shame, agreed to let Efua live with her aunt. This aunt was very different. She welcomed Efua with open arms, with warmth and kindness that Efua had never truly felt before. For the first time in many years, Efua felt safe and loved. She could finally breathe without fear or pain weighing on her chest. When Efua's next birthday came around, it wasn't a quiet day of leftovers and loneliness. No, this time, something special happened. Femi, her loyal friend who had always been by her side, showed up with a beautiful cake, the kind with bright frosting and candles. He smiled and said, "You deserve the whole cake, not just the leftovers." Those words filled Efua's heart with a happiness she never thought she'd feel. As she took her first bite, surrounded by people who cared, Efua smiled like a girl who had finally found her place in the world. This cake was more than just food. It was a symbol of her new life, a new start where she was seen, loved, and respected. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was truly living. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with everyone you know. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories like Efua's, and drop a comment below telling us what you would do if you were in her shoes. Let's spread hope and strength together. Twinkle, twinkle,